I didn't mean to wake up in a penthouse that probably cost more per month than I'd make in 10 years. But that wasn't even the worst part. The worst part was him. Adrian Cole kept his eyes closed for exactly 3 seconds longer than necessary. Like maybe if he stayed still enough, the world would reset itself and drop him back into his very normal, very safe Brooklyn apartment with its flickering kitchen light and the neighbor who vacuumed at 2 a.m. But the air here was different, cooler, cleaner, expensive in a way you could almost taste, and the sheets beneath his fingers were too soft, too smooth, like they belonged in a magazine spread, not under him. He swallowed, throat dry, and then he felt it. That awareness, sharp and immediate, like stepping into a spotlight you didn't ask for. Someone was in the room. Decisions to this. Fragments came back in flashes. Rain hitting pavement, neon lights bleeding into puddles, the press of a crowded bar, and then him. Those eyes. That presence. Too close. Not safe. Adrian dragged a hand through his hair, heart picking up speed for reasons he didn't want to examine too closely. Look, he started, already planning his exit strategy, already imagining how fast he could get dressed and disappear without making this worse. Last night was a mistake. The man interrupted, one eyebrow lifting just slightly, not mocking, not kind either, just precise. Adrian froze. I was going to say unexpected, he corrected, because apparently his survival instincts included not offending dangerously attractive strangers in expensive apartments. The man stepped closer, not fast, not threatening, but deliberate enough that Adrian felt it anyway, that shift in space, that subtle narrowing of distance that made the room feel smaller. Too close. Way too close. Adrian's pulse jumped, he said, already sliding toward the edge of the bed, already scanning the room for his clothes like they might magically assemble themselves into a normal situation. But the man did not move out of his way, did not even look surprised, which somehow made it worse. Adrian found his shirt draped neatly over the back of a chair, like someone had taken the time to place it there, folded, deliberate, controlled. And that tiny detail made his stomach twist because nothing about this felt messy or accidental anymore. It felt curated. You can try, the man said, voice still calm, still level, but there was something underneath it now, something that made Adrian pause mid-reach, fingers hovering over the fabric. Try? Adrian echoed, because that was not a normal response to someone wanting to leave. That was the kind of response people gave when leaving was not actually an option. He straightened slowly, turning back. I am sorry. Is there a reason I cannot walk out the front door like a normal human being? He asked, forcing a laugh that sounded thin even to his own ears. The man tilted his head just slightly, studying him again, like Adrian was missing something obvious. You can walk out, he said, and for half a second relief flickered, quick and bright, until he added, but it will not change anything. And just like that, the relief died. Adrian blinked. That is not ominous at all. He muttered, dragging his shirt on anyway, because standing there half-dressed while being cryptically threatened was not how he planned to spend his morning. The fabric felt warmer than it should have, like it had been handled recently. And he ignored that, absolutely ignored that. Look, I do not know who you are, Adrian continued, tugging the shirt into place. And I do not think I want to know, but I am pretty sure whatever is going on here has nothing to do with me. The man watched him quietly, then stepped closer again, not invading, not touching, just close enough that Adrian could feel the shift in air, the presence, the weight of attention that made it hard to breathe normally. Everything that happens in this city has something to do with someone, he said, and right now, that someone is you. Adrian let out a short laugh, shaking his head. Yeah. No. I think you have the wrong guy. I am not important. I am not connected. I am not anything. I literally design marketing emails for a living. The most dangerous thing I have done this week is ignore a parking ticket. The man's gaze flickered, something unreadable passing through it. That is exactly why this is a problem, he said quietly. And that made even less sense. Adrian opened his mouth to argue, to push back, to demand an explanation that actually sounded like English instead of whatever cryptic script this guy was reading from. But before he could, a sharp buzz cut through the room, low and precise. The man did not flinch, did not even look surprised. He simply reached into his pocket, glanced at whatever message had come through, and for the first time, the perfect control in his expression shifted, not breaking, just tightening, like something had changed behind the scenes, something Adrian could not see but could definitely feel. The man looked back at him, slower this time, more focused, It seems, he said, voice quieter now, heavier somehow, that leaving is no longer your biggest concern. Adrian's stomach dropped, cold and immediate. That is not comforting, he said, and he meant it, because whatever this was, whatever invisible line he had just stepped over, it was getting harder and harder to pretend it was just a mistake, and the worst part was the way the man was looking at him now, like Adrian was not just involved, but already claimed by something he did not understand at all. Adrian did not like that sentence, not even a little, because it landed wrong, heavy in his chest in a way that made instinct kick in before logic could catch up. And instinct was loud right now, louder than the expensive silence, louder than the steady city hum 30 floors below, louder than the calm, controlled man standing in front of him like none of this was unusual. Okay, Adrian said slowly, holding up a hand like he could physically pause whatever invisible shift had just happened. I'm going to need you to stop talking like we are in the middle of a thriller movie and start explaining things in plain English, because right now I feel like I missed about 10 chapters. The man watched him without interrupting, which somehow made it worse, because most people would react, would smile, would show something human, but this man just observed, like Adrian's reaction was data being collected, processed, filed away. You are aware, Adrian continued, because silence made him spiral, and he refused to spiral alone. That saying things like, it will not change anything, and you are the problem, is not reassuring, right? That is the opposite of reassuring. He let out a breath, rubbing the back of his neck, trying to ground himself in something normal, anything normal. So here is what I am going to do. I am going to walk to that door. I am going to leave. I am going to get coffee from a place that does not look like it charges $12 for oat milk, and then I am going to pretend this entire situation never happened. He nodded once, decisive, because if he said it confidently enough, maybe it would become real. Maybe this would shrink back into something manageable, something that made sense. He took a step toward the door, then another, the floor cool under his bare feet, the space too open, too quiet, every movement feeling louder than it should, and for a second, nothing happened, no alarm, no sudden interruption, just the steady rhythm of his own heartbeat. Good, great, normal. See, he was overthinking. He was absolutely overthinking. His hand reached for the handle, fingers brushing the metal, and then, Adrian, the man said, and Adrian froze, because he had not given his name. He knew he had not given his name. His mind rewound fast, searching, scanning, replaying the fragments of last night, the noise, the rain, the blur of voices. But he would have remembered that. He would have remembered telling a stranger his name. His grip tightened on the handle, but he did not open the door, did not turn around either, because suddenly that felt like a mistake, like acknowledging it would make it more real. You should not go out there yet, the man added, voice still calm, still controlled. But now it carried something else. Something that sounded dangerously close to concern, and that made even less sense. Adrian let out a short, disbelieving laugh, still facing the door. You keep saying things like that, he said. And every time you do, I want to do the exact opposite. He glanced over his shoulder finally, meeting those steady eyes again. Also, how do you know my name? The question came out sharper than he intended, but he did not take it back. He could not afford to soften anything right now, not when the ground kept shifting under him. The man did not answer immediately, and that pause, that deliberate choice not to fill the silence, stretched long enough to make Adrian's pulse spike again. Because I made it my business to know, he said at last, simple, direct, like that explained everything. Like that was a normal answer. Adrian stared at him, waiting for the rest, for the punchline, for the clarification that would turn this back into reality. But nothing came, just that steady gaze, that unshakable presence. And something inside Adrian clicked into place, slow and cold. Because that was not something you said about a stranger you met one night. That was something you said about someone you had been watching, tracking, choosing. His hand slipped from the door handle, falling to his side without him realizing it. No, Adrian said quietly, more to himself than anything. No, that is not how this works. But the problem was, the way the man looked at him now, calm, certain, unbothered, made it feel like maybe that was exactly how this worked, and Adrian was the only one who had not known it from the start. Adrian took a step back from the door without meaning to, like his body had already decided something his brain was still arguing against, and that irritated him more than anything else, because he did not like losing control, not even in small, quiet ways like this. You made it your business, he repeated, slower this time, tasting the words like they might rearrange themselves into something less unsettling, but they did not. They stayed exactly what they were, deliberate and intentional. And that made his chest tighten. That is not normal, he added, because. Apparently stating the obvious was the only thing keeping him grounded. The man did not deny it, did not even try to soften it, which was somehow more honest and more alarming at the same time. No, he agreed simply, and that single word landed heavier than a whole explanation would have. Adrian let out a breath that sounded halfway between a laugh and a protest, running both hands through his hair, pacing now because standing still felt like surrender. Okay, great, fantastic, so we are just. Acknowledging that this is not normal and moving on like that is fine. He muttered, circling once, twice, the room suddenly feeling smaller despite the massive windows and open space. His eyes flicked toward the skyline outside, New York stretching endlessly in every direction, taxis like tiny yellow dots, people like moving shadows, life continuing as if he was not standing here inside something he did not understand. I have a job, Adrian said abruptly, stopping mid-step, because normal. Details felt important right now, anchors in a situation that kept drifting further from reality. I have emails to send, meetings I am already late for, a boss who thinks being 5 minutes behind schedule is a personal attack. I cannot just stay here because you decided I am suddenly part of whatever this is. He gestured vaguely between them, frustration bleeding into his voice now. Because fear was easier to handle when it looked like annoyance, the man watched him the entire time, quiet, patient, like he was waiting for Adrian to reach a conclusion on his own, and that calm patience made Adrian's skin prickle. You are free to leave, the man said again, and Adrian almost laughed, because there it was, the same line, the same illusion of choice wrapped in something that felt anything but optional. But the moment you step outside, people will notice, he continued, and that made Adrian's irritation falter, just slightly, just enough for doubt to slip in. Notice what? Adrian asked, more cautious now. The man's gaze did not shift. You, he said, like it was obvious, like that alone was enough explanation. Adrian blinked. People notice people all the time. That is called living. In a city, he shot back, but his voice lacked the confidence it had a moment ago, because something about the way the man said it did not sound casual. It sounded specific, targeted, like this was not about being seen, it was about being recognized. And that was a completely different problem. The man stepped closer again, not closing the distance entirely, just enough to narrow the space between them into something more focused, more contained. Last night was not random, he said, each word measured, controlled. You were not in the wrong place at the wrong time. Adrian felt his stomach drop, slow and heavy, because that confirmed it, that cold realization from earlier, the one he had tried to ignore, tried to push aside as paranoia. Then what was it? Adrian asked quietly, because suddenly he was not sure he wanted the answer, but he needed it anyway. The man held his gaze, unflinching. You were exactly where you were meant to be, he said, and something in the certainty of. That statement made Adrian's pulse spike again, sharp and immediate, because there was no hesitation, no doubt, just absolute conviction. Adrian shook his head, backing up another step, putting space between them like distance could protect him from whatever this was. No, no, I do not do fate. I do not do destiny. I especially do not do mysterious strangers deciding my life has some kind of predetermined path, he said, the words coming faster now, more defensive. I make bad decisions, sure. I go to the wrong bar, I talk to the wrong person, that is on me. But that does not mean it was planned. The man's expression did not change, but something in his eyes softened just slightly. Not weakness, not kindness exactly, something more complicated. It was not your plan, he said quietly, but it was mine. And that was it. That was the moment everything shifted again, because Adrian realized he had not walked into something by accident. He had walked into something that had been waiting, and the worst part was the way his chest tightened at that thought, not just with fear, but with something else he could not quite name, something that made leaving feel less simple than it should have been. Adrian stared at him like the words might rearrange themselves into something less insane, something that fit inside the boundaries of reality he was used to, but they did not. They stayed exactly what they were, steady and certain and impossible to ignore. Your plan, Adrian repeated, quieter now, because the volume of his voice did not matter when the weight of the situation had already settled in, heavy and unmoving. "You planned what, exactly?" he asked, and this time he did not try to sound sarcastic or dismissive, because something in him had shifted, something that recognized this was not a conversation he could joke his way out of. The man studied him for a moment, like he was deciding how much to say, how much Adrian was ready to hear, and that alone made Adrian's pulse spike again, because it meant there was more, a lot more. "I planned to find you," the man said finally, simple and direct. And that answer should not have been as unsettling as it was, but it was, because it was too clean, too intentional. Adrian let out a slow breath, shaking his head. "You keep saying things like that like they make sense, like there is context I am just magically supposed to understand," he said, his hands lifting slightly before dropping again, restless, unsure what to do with the energy building under his skin. "Why me?" he asked, and that question came out sharper than anything else he had said so far. Because it mattered, because if this was not random, then there had to be a reason, and reasons could be understood, controlled, maybe even fixed. The man's gaze softened again, just a fraction, like Adrian had finally asked the right question. "Because you were not supposed to be visible," he said, and that did not help at all. Adrian blinked. "That is not an answer. That is the beginning of a conspiracy theory," he said flatly, but his voice did not carry the same edge. Not when confusion was starting to bleed into something deeper, something more uneasy. The man stepped closer again, and this time Adrian did not step back, not because he was not aware of the distance, but because he was too focused on the words, on trying to piece them together into something that made sense. "You live a predictable life," the man continued, tone even, analytical in a way that felt almost clinical. "Same commute, same routines, same places. You move through the city without drawing attention, without creating patterns that stand out." Adrian frowned, because that sounded less like an observation and more like a report, like something that had been studied, tracked, noted over time. "That is called being normal," Adrian said slowly, but even as he said it, doubt crept in, because the man was not describing normal like it was common, he was describing it like it was rare. "It is called being invisible," the man corrected, and that word landed differently. Heavier. Adrian's chest tightened slightly, because invisible was not something he had ever thought of himself as, not really. But when he replayed his days, his routines, the way people passed him without a second glance, the way he blended into the background of crowded streets and quiet offices, it was not entirely wrong either. "Okay," Adrian said, drawing the word out as he tried to stay grounded. "Even if I accept that, which I am not saying I do, what does that have to do with you planning to find me?" The man's expression did not change, but there was a shift in his focus, something sharper, more intent. "Because someone like you should not have been noticed," he said. And that was when the unease turned into something colder, something that settled deep in Adrian's chest. "Noticed by who?" Adrian asked quietly, because he already knew the answer mattered more than anything else that had been said so far. The man held his gaze, unwavering. "By people who do not look for accidents," he said, "only for targets." And just like that, the room felt different again, smaller, tighter, the open space pressing in instead of offering freedom. Adrian's mind raced, trying to catch up, trying to understand how his quiet, ordinary life had somehow intersected with something that used words like that so casually. "I am not a target," Adrian said, more firmly than he felt, because denial was easier than acceptance. The man did not argue, did not correct him, which somehow made it worse. "You were not," he said instead, "until last night." And that was it. That was the moment the ground dropped out from under Adrian completely, because whatever had happened, whatever this connection was, it had changed something fundamental, something he could not see but could definitely feel. And for the first time since waking up, leaving that penthouse did not feel like escape anymore. It felt like stepping into something far more complicated than he was prepared for. Adrian felt the words settle in his chest like something heavy and immovable, and for a moment he did not speak, did not move, because reacting too quickly felt like the wrong choice now. Like every step he took without understanding would only pull him deeper into whatever this was, until last night. He repeated quietly, more to himself than to the man standing in front of him, because saying it out loud made it real in a way thinking it did not. His mind tried to rewind again, to go back to that moment, the bar, the rain, the way everything had felt chaotic but normal, random in the way life in New York always was. But now every detail felt different, sharper, like it had been placed there instead of happening naturally. You are saying that one night, one decision, suddenly turns me into something people are looking for, Adrian said, lifting his gaze again, searching the man's face for something that resembled doubt, hesitation, anything human he could hold on to, but there was none. Only that same steady certainty. Not something, the man corrected softly, someone, and that distinction landed harder than anything else so far. Adrian let out a breath, slow and controlled, even though his pulse was anything but. That does not make it better, he said, and it did not. It made it worse, because objects could be lost, ignored, replaced, but people were different. People could be followed, tracked, remembered. Then why are you telling me this? Adrian asked, because that question mattered now more than anything else. If I am suddenly visible, if I am a problem, why not just let me walk out and deal with it myself? The man's expression shifted slightly, not enough to call it emotion, but enough to register as something deliberate. Because you would not make it past the lobby without being seen, he said, and that sentence was calm, almost casual, but the implication behind it was anything but. Adrian's stomach tightened again, instinct flaring, telling him to move, to leave, to not wait around for whatever came next. You keep saying that like you are protecting me, Adrian said, voice sharpening. But it sounds a lot like you are controlling the situation instead. The man did not deny that either, which was becoming a pattern Adrian did not appreciate. Those two things are not mutually exclusive, he replied, and that was honest in a way that made Adrian uneasy, because it meant there was no pretense here, no attempt to soften the truth. So what? Adrian continued, pacing again because standing still felt like giving up. I stay here, in your very expensive, very intimidating penthouse, and hope that whatever problem you created just goes away. He gestured toward the windows, toward the city, toward everything outside that suddenly felt further away than it should. The man watched him carefully, then stepped closer again, reducing the space until Adrian had to stop moving or risk stepping directly into him. You stay here, he said, voice low but steady. Until I know who noticed you and why. Adrian blinked, caught off guard by the phrasing. You do not already know, he asked, because that seemed impossible, because everything about this man suggested control, knowledge, awareness far beyond normal limits. The man held his gaze, and for the first time, there was something there Adrian had not seen before, not weakness, but a crack in certainty, small and controlled, but real. No, he said, and that single word shifted the entire dynamic again, because suddenly this was not just about Adrian being pulled into something dangerous. It was about the man in front of him not having complete control either, and that realization did something strange to Adrian's fear. It did not remove it, but it changed its shape, made it sharper, more focused. That is not reassuring, Adrian said quietly, because if the one person who seemed to understand this situation did not have all the answers, then whatever was coming was bigger than he had thought. The man's gaze softened again, just slightly. I am aware, he replied, and for a moment, neither of them spoke, the silence stretching again, but this time it felt different, less like tension ready to snap, and more like something settling into place, something inevitable. Adrian exhaled slowly, looking toward the door again, then back at the man, because leaving no longer felt simple, not when every option now came with consequences he did not fully understand. And that was the worst part, not the danger itself, but the fact that he could not see it clearly, could not measure it, could not decide how to face it, and standing there, caught between staying and leaving, Adrian realized something he had been trying very hard not to admit. He was already involved, whether he liked it or not, and whatever came next was not something he could just walk away from anymore. Adrian dragged a hand down his face, slow, deliberate, like maybe if he could physically wipe away the last 10 minutes everything would reset back into something manageable. But it did not. Nothing about this reset. It only settled deeper, heavier, more real. So let me get this straight, he said, voice quieter now, less defensive and more focused, because panic was not helping anymore. I was invisible, then I met you, and now I am suddenly visible to people who do not look for accidents. He paused, letting the words sit between them, testing how they felt out loud. And you do not know who those people are yet. The man did not interrupt, did not correct him, which Adrian took as confirmation, and that confirmation did something sharp and cold in his chest, Because uncertainty was worse than a clear threat. Uncertainty meant anything could happen. That is a terrible situation, Adrian added under his breath. Pacing again, but slower this time, more controlled, like he was trying to think instead of just react. He moved toward the windows, drawn to the city like it might offer answers. But all he saw were reflections, his own figure faint against the glass, smaller than he felt inside. This room. And you expect me to just stay here while you figure it out, he continued, turning back, the question not quite accusatory anymore, more like he was genuinely trying to understand the logic. The man stepped closer but stopped a few feet away this time, giving Adrian space in a way that felt intentional, like he had noticed the shift. I expect you to stay because it is the safest option available, he said. And there it was again, that calm certainty, that refusal to dress things up in comforting lies. Adrian huffed out a quiet laugh, shaking his head. You keep using that word, safe, like it means something in this context, he said. But his voice did not carry the same bite, not when part of him was starting to accept it. Even if he did not want to, safe does not mean nothing happens, the man replied. It means you are where I can see you. And that sentence should not have been reassuring, not at all. But something about the way he said it, steady, grounded, made Adrian's shoulders loosen just slightly before he could stop himself, and that annoyed him more than anything else. That sounds like control again, Adrian pointed out, but softer this time, less like an accusation and more like a statement of fact. The man inclined his head just slightly, acknowledging it without denying it. It is, he said, but it is also the only way I can keep track of variables I do not yet understand. Adrian blinked, because that phrasing was different, less about possession and more about strategy, about calculation, and suddenly this did not feel personal in the way he had assumed. It felt larger, more complex, like he had stepped into something already in motion. You talk about this like it is a system, Adrian said slowly, watching him carefully now. Like everything is pieces and patterns and outcomes. The man met his gaze evenly. Because it is, he said, and that answer settled into Adrian's mind with uncomfortable clarity, because it explained the calm, the control, the way nothing seemed to shake him. This was not chaos to him. It was structure, something he could navigate, even if not perfectly. Adrian exhaled, long and slow, his thoughts finally starting to align into something more coherent. Then where do I fit in that system? He asked, and that question felt important in a way the others had not, because it was no longer about leaving or staying. It was about understanding his place in whatever this was. The man studied him for a moment, and this time the pause felt different, heavier, more deliberate, like the answer mattered more than the others had. You were not supposed to be part of it, he said quietly, but now you are the point everything is moving toward. Adrian felt his pulse spike again, sharp and immediate, because that was not a small role. That was not something he could ignore or step away from. That is not a role I signed up for, Adrian said, his voice steady despite the tension building under his skin. The man's gaze did not waver. I am aware, he replied, and there was something in that tone now, something almost like acknowledgement, like he understood the weight of it, even if he could not change it. And for a moment, the room fell quiet again. The city stretching endlessly beyond the glass, life continuing as if nothing had shifted. But inside that penthouse, Adrian realized something had changed permanently, not just in his situation, but in how he saw it. Because this was no longer about escaping a strange morning, it was about stepping into something that had already begun, something that was now centered around him whether he wanted it or not, and as much as he wanted to deny it, to push back, to walk out and pretend none of this existed. A part of him understood the truth he had been avoiding since the moment he woke up. This was not random, and whatever came next was going to demand more from him than just walking away. Adrian stayed quiet longer this time, not because he did not have anything to say, but because everything felt like it mattered now. Every word, every reaction, like this was no longer a conversation he could drift through on instinct alone. He leaned back slightly against the cool glass of the window, grounding himself in something solid while his mind worked through what he had just heard. The point everything is moving toward, he repeated slowly, testing the shape of it, because it sounded too big, too central for someone like him, someone who had spent most of his life unnoticed, unremarkable in the safest way possible. You realize that sounds like the kind of thing people say right before everything goes very wrong, he added, a faint edge of humor slipping through despite the tension. because humor was the only way he knew how to keep from feeling overwhelmed. The man did not smile, but something in his expression shifted again, softer at the edges, like he recognized the coping mechanism even if he did not share it. Things have already gone wrong, he said, calm and direct, and that honesty landed heavier than any attempt at reassurance would have. Adrian exhaled slowly, nodding once as he looked back out over the city. The morning light brighter now, the streets below busier, people moving with purpose, unaware that anything had changed. So what happens next? Adrian asked, and this time the question was steady. Grounded, because running from it was not an option anymore. The man stepped closer, stopping just within Adrian's peripheral awareness, close enough to be felt without crowding him. We wait, he said, and Adrian let out a quiet breath of disbelief. Because of course that was the answer. Of course it was something as simple and as complicated as waiting. You are telling me that the plan is to sit here and hope something reveals itself, Adrian said, turning his head slightly to look at him. Again, the man shook his head once, subtle but definite. Not hope, he corrected. Observe, and that word shifted something in Adrian's understanding again, because observing meant attention to detail, meant this was not passive at all. It was controlled, deliberate. You think someone is going to make a move, Adrian said, and this time it was not a question, more like a realization forming in real time. The man held his gaze. If you were noticed, then whoever noticed you will want to confirm it, he said. People like that do not ignore variables. Adrian felt a chill run through him at that, because he did not like being reduced to a variable, did not like the idea of someone out there evaluating him without him even knowing. And I am just supposed to stand here and be observable, he said, the word feeling strange in his mouth. The man's expression softened again, just slightly. You are not alone in it, he said, and that should not have mattered, but it did, more than Adrian wanted to admit, because as controlled and unsettling as this man was, he was also the only one who seemed to understand what was happening. Adrian shifted his weight, crossing his arms loosely as he looked at him fully now, studying him in return for once. You keep saying that like it is supposed to make this easier, Adrian said quietly. But I still do not know who you are. The man was silent for a moment, and this pause felt different from the others, heavier, more personal, like the answer to that question carried weight beyond the situation itself. Sebastian Voss, he said finally, and the name landed between them with a quiet finality. Adrian frowned slightly, repeating it under his breath like it might trigger recognition. And then something clicked, not fully, not clearly, but enough to send a ripple of unease through him, because he had heard it before, in passing conversations, in headlines he had not paid attention to, in the kind of stories people half believed and half dismissed. That name sounds familiar, Adrian admitted, watching him more carefully now. Sebastian did not react, did not confirm or deny, just let the realization settle at Adrian's pace, and that alone said more than words could. Adrian let out a slow breath, shaking his head slightly. Of course it does, he muttered, because of course he had not just walked into a complicated situation, he had walked into something tied to someone far more significant than he had realized, and standing there, with the city stretching endlessly behind him, and a man whose name carried weight he was only beginning to understand standing in front of him, Adrian realized that whatever came next was not just about being noticed anymore, it was about being connected, and that was a lot harder to walk away from. Adrian repeated the name again in his head, slower this time, letting it settle. Sebastian Voss. And the more he sat with it, the more it unraveled into something heavier, something tied to quiet conversations and half-finished headlines he had never paid attention to, the kind of name people lowered their voices around without fully explaining why. Right, Adrian said under his breath, exhaling through a small, disbelieving smile that did not quite reach his eyes. Of course that is who you are. He looked up again, really looking this time, not just at the man in front of him, but at everything surrounding him. The height of the building, the silence of the space, the way nothing felt accidental, and suddenly it all fit together in a way that made his chest tighten. So I did not just end up in someone's penthouse, he continued, voice steadier now, more grounded in the reality he was piecing together. I ended up here. Sebastian did not respond immediately, but the lack of denial was answer enough. Adrian let out a slow breath, dragging a hand through his hair again. That actually explains a lot and somehow makes everything worse at the same time, he added, because now the situation had weight, context, consequences he could not ignore. He pushed himself away from the window, pacing once more but slower, more deliberate, like he was trying to map out a problem instead of escape it. Okay, he said after a moment, turning back. So I am connected to you now, whether I like it or not. And because of that, someone else might be paying attention. He paused, watching Sebastian closely. Which means staying here is not just about safety. It is about control over who sees me and when. Sebastian inclined his head slightly, a subtle confirmation that Adrian had finally aligned with the reality of it. And that realization did something unexpected. It did not calm Adrian, but it gave him direction, something to hold on to instead of just reacting blindly. You could have told me that from the start, Adrian said quietly, not accusing, just stating it. Sebastian's gaze held his, steady as ever. You would not have believed it, he replied, and that was fair, annoyingly fair. Adrian huffed out a small breath, shaking his head. Yeah, no, you are right. I definitely would have assumed you were completely out of your mind, he admitted, the honesty surprising even himself. The corner of Sebastian's mouth shifted almost imperceptibly, not quite a smile, but close enough to register, and that small change made Adrian pause, because it was the first thing that felt remotely human in a way he could recognize. So what now? Adrian asked again. But this time the question carried less uncertainty and more intent, because he was no longer asking how to leave. He was asking how to move forward. Sebastian stepped closer, stopping just within arm's reach, the distance deliberate, controlled. Now we wait, he repeated, but the words felt different this time, less passive, more like a strategy Adrian was now part of, not just subjected to. Adrian held his gaze, something steady forming in his chest despite everything else. And if someone does make a move, he asked. Quieter now, Sebastian did not hesitate. Then I will see it first, he said, and there was no arrogance in that statement, just certainty, the kind that came from experience Adrian could not begin to understand. And for a moment, the tension in the room shifted again, not disappearing, but settling into something more balanced, like two sides of the same problem finally acknowledging each other. Adrian exhaled slowly, nodding once, because whether he liked it or not, this was where he was. This was the situation he had stepped into, and denying it was not going to change anything. You know, Adrian said after a beat, glancing toward the city again before looking back. For something that was apparently planned on your end, this still feels like a very bad idea. Sebastian's gaze softened just slightly, that almost smile returning in a way that felt quieter, more personal. Most things worth paying attention to do, he replied, and that answer lingered in the air between them. Not comforting, not reassuring, but honest in a way that made it harder to argue with. Adrian let out a quiet breath, shaking his head once more, but this time there was less resistance in it, less denial, because somewhere between waking up in that room and standing here now, something had shifted inside him, something that recognized this was not just a mistake to recover from. It was a turning point, and as much as he wanted to walk away from it, a part of him understood the truth he had been circling since the beginning. He was already in too deep, and whatever came next was not just about surviving it. It was about facing it alongside the one person who had pulled him into it in the first place.